and reconciliation that actually started here half a year ago. It was in the spring of this year when we had the first seminar of this type. So now we have the second one. First, to say that the Dean Stan wanted to be here with us. And then I was asked to open it myself. So let me just remind the basic things. Memory is a very important phenomenon of our life. It is an individual and collective dimension. It is a part of our discourse, whether like it or not, whether we are oblivious or whether we can have a capacity to remember. And we would like to spend now a couple of hours, 2.5 hours maybe, in discussing about these things. We have a really very impressive group of speakers. First panel will be rather focused on general aspects of the problem, on the philosophical aspects of the problem, and then we will go to more concrete debates, focus on a situation as far as memory, conflict, and reconstruction is concerned in one particular country, which is certainly in your hearts and in our minds for sure, Cuba. This project, and this is an opening, started as a communication between us. I'm Martin Balog, director of the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Diplomacy here, and Czech non-governmental organization called Postbellum. Postbellum is an interesting entity collecting stories and archiving stories of individuals' experience during the 20th century, exposures of individuals to totalitarianism. And obviously the question is, what is in it? Is it just a collection of archival materials for future historians that will be able to have some more specific information about certain things? Or how relevant it is in the context of concrete political debates taking place today? As I've said, the name, and I hope that both Martin Grobe and Martin Peterpio from Postbellum will comment on that. The name of their organization, Postbellum, is a little bit, in my view, misleading, because it indicates that it is going to reflect something post-bellum, something what happened in the past, conflict that was in a state of actuality in the past and is not anymore. In the case of Cuba, it seems to me that it is rather in bellum situation where we still have totalitarian regime running this country, and we have Cubans that certainly would love to find a way how to open the debate about the Cuban future in participation of all Cubans, and not just the future of Cuba in the hands of few people now running the country, Junta, Castro family, you can name those. So I hope that you will enjoy this conversation. Our interest is, and I've already asked the participants in the program in the first half of this year, and I'm asking these participants today that will be introduced shortly to become contributors to an edited volume in which we would like to summarize, to put these things together so that we can more effectively contribute to an important debate about this topic, and also to help especially young people in the process of education, and maybe to use these materials in our continuing work here at this university. So, there will be, as you see on the program, 2 panels, as I said. I will, in a moment, will change my hat, I will become a moderator of the panel 1. And in this moment, and then Richard Cohen, who is over there, will take over the second panel. So then, as a moderator, I will introduce my panelists, and for Richard will be the task. His task will be to introduce the members of the panel 2. But before he can do that, it's up to me to introduce him. Richard Cohen is a man of many achievements. He is the author of books, Chasing the Sun, By the Sword, and How to Write Like Tolstoy. And he now is working on a beautiful and interesting project, the history of historians. He is published in New York Times review of books, and many other significant publications, quarterly journals. So he is a really man with a strong qualification to help us, to enlighten us in this context. He also is editor of basically all books written by former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. And I think that you should know that Madeleine Albright's next book will come next spring. Richard knows more about that than I do, with the title Fascism Warning. So it's going to be another interesting contribution to the debate that certainly has a Cuban dimension, and our Central experience is part of that. Secondly, what we would like to do is also to have a lively exchange with the audience. So how we are going to proceed? I will now switch my hats and we'll start panel number 1. I will give the floor to all panelists first to make their own case. Then we will have respondents, people who have not prepared themselves the notes or any contribution in advance, but they will be first to react to the interventions made by the panelists. And then we will open it up for general discussion, and hopefully it will be fruitful, enjoyable, and will help us to understand better things that are maybe part of our human identity and part of our ongoing search for ourselves. Because, as you know, to know oneself is maybe the most important challenge and task in human beings, and they can lead good order of life. So let me go to the panel number 1. First, I need to introduce speakers, and I will start from the right to the left. On the right, we have Monsignor Professor Tomáš Halík, Father Tomáš Halík, Catholic priest from Prague. He's a professor of sociology at the Institute of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Charles University in Prague. His specialization is philosophy of religion, sociology of religion, religious dialogue, and dialogue between believers and non-believers. He is also he's author of numerous books in which his focus is the spiritual diagnosis of our time and the dialogue between faith and atheism, and books including Patience in God, The Night of the Confessor, and What Want You to Be. His books have been published up to 18 languages and have received international recognition and awards. Patience with God received the prize for the best European theological book in 2009-2010 by decision of European Society of Catholic Theology. And for his many other things, since 2009, he is granted the title of Monsignor, honorary prelate of His Holiness. He also is recipient of several important international prizes: Cardinal Kering's Prize 2003, Roman Gardini Prize 2010, Honorary Man of Reconciliation 2010 for his contribution to dialogue between Christians and Jews. In 2014, he was awarded the Templeton Prize, which is being conceived as a kind of equivalent of Nobel Prize in the area of humanities. And this year, and this is the last thing I would like to tell about him, he got the prize for his book, I Want You to Be, the best book by a group of American publishers. By the way, this tomorrow, this book will be presented in the bookstore called Books in Coral Gables, so you might have the opportunity to go there, to buy the book, and to have a conversation about this particular thing. Next to Tomáš Halík is Professor David Walsh. Professor David Walsh comes from, he is a professor at Catholic University in Washington. Last year, so I would like to present.
That's all right, don't worry about it.
No,
Don't worry, I'm here.
I can do it myself. David Walsh is one of the unique political philosophers. He is now president of Relief Society, which is a society, I think one of the distinguished societies of classical political philosophy here in the United States, operating in the past 3 decades. He's author also of numerous books, I think that belong to the school of philosophical personalism. And his recent book, Philosophy of Person, Philosophy of Being, Politics of Person, Politics of Being, is a great inspiration, and I think that he's going to make contributions to this debate from the perspective that is articulated in this book. Next to Professor Walsh is Martin Kroupa. Martin Kroupa is one of the 2 great young persons representing here this organization post-Gallup. But he's also a philosopher, so I would like to engage him to this conversation of professors from his perspective. His father was also a philosopher. He was one of the Charter 77 signatories, which means for him philosophy is not just a safe reflection on the things from the distance, but it is again matter of personal integrity, of personal participation in public processes, and he will tell you more about the post-Bellum and the way how this group has come into existence and what they are doing right now. And we will have as a respondent Orlando Gutierrez. Orlando Gutierrez does not need to be introduced here. He participated in the conference himself in the spring. Now he's going to be a respondent. And his again, area of activities is stretched. On the one hand, as a president of Directory General Cubano, he's one of the activists, someone who is personally involved in the current Cuban struggle for freedom, democracy, and against totalitarianism. But at the same time, he is also a philosopher. I admire this type of combination of specializations. So I'm really looking forward for his remarks. And let me close my opening statement, and then I will ask Tomáš to start first with something what I had in mind. What I had in mind when I was preparing for this panel. Actually, I will be quoting from a British philosopher, Geoffrey Barraclough, who in 1970s was discovered by Czech philosopher Jan Patočka. Closely before Patočka died, after he became a spokesperson for Charter 77, and they engaged in the discussion about the question, what is contemporary history? And this will be a question for you. And so what Barraclough said in this context, the very notion of contemporary history is contradiction in terms. Before we can adopt a historical point of view, we must stand at certain distance from the happenings we are investigating. It's hard at all times to disengage ourselves and look at the past dispassionately and with the critical eye of the historian. It is possible at all in the case of events which we are so closely upon our own lives. And then he continues, contemporary is a very elastic term. And to say, as it is often done, that contemporary history is the history of the generation now living is an unsatisfactory definition of the
Go ahead, that's our part.
It's my daughter, and I love her basketball. Sorry. It's a generation now living is an unsatisfactory definition for the simple illusion that generations overlap. Furthermore, if contemporary history is regarded in this way, we are left with ever-changing boundaries and ever-changing context with a subject matter that is in current flux. And then Barakov's definition, which is then challenged and taken as a point of departure of discussion between philosopher and historian. Contemporary history follows an almost contradictory procedure to history of the traditional time. Although the later starts at a given point in the past and works systematically forward from the chosen starting point, the point of departure of the former is presence of historian. What he needs to do first to start his study of the selected historical phenomena is to establish its distinguished features and boundaries. And Barakov then suggests this distinguished feature, which is, I think, our view. He says that it is a strong sense of living in a new period. A strong sense of living in a period in which past and future are divided by a certain gap. My feeling is that what Post-Böhm is doing is a heroic effort to bridge this gap between past and the possible futures. That it is a history which is not disengaged but has to be engaged. It is the history in which historian is a participant and not just an objective, unbiased observer. History, in that sense, certainly has both individual and collective dimension. We are all ourselves, but we are all parts of bigger communities, being it family, being it society, being it nation. So let's have this discussion first in general terms. I will ask first Professor Tomáš Halík to open up, and then David Walsh, Martin Kroupa, and then Orlando Gutierrez are going to say something that will enlighten us in all these puzzling things. So Tomáš, floor is yours. Thank you very much for patience.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me into this surprising ring from winter to summer. And I would like to offer some provocative ideas for our discussion. I want to start to speak about the collective memory. I think the collective memory precedes the individual memory. Memory is primarily a collective memory, a shared memory. We all are born into a certain culture. And substantial part of all cultures is a collective memory. Jan Assmann, the German historian, specialist for Egypt, made a distinction between communicative and cultural memory. Our individual experiences live in the communicative memory, in oral history, in our narratives for one generation, for years, then are forgotten or become a part of cultural memory in written text, in commemorative rituals, celebrations of anniversaries, monuments, etc. There are always many different collective memories. There is no unique collective memory as a plurality. Each group has its own collective memory. So the collective culture memories are treasures of narrative stories which create and keep our identity. Nations and churches are storytelling communities. Also, traditional families have been storytelling communities. The stories to share experiences of ancestors help family members to create their own personal identity. But family culture and family memory is in many parts of the world in a deep crisis for different reasons. An example, I was in Ukraine some 5 years ago. I spoke with young students and they told me in our families nobody speaks about our ancestors, our grandparents, because there are so many scars of the history. The families were always divided. Part of the family was in Bandera groups, another part the communist partisans, and there was also this pressure from the state. So our parents, they will be afraid to speak about our family history. And it causes also the crisis of the national identity. The young Ukrainians thought we must now discover or invent our national identity. We don't know who we are. Are we part of Europe? Are we part of Russia? And many of these political tensions connected with this crisis of collective memories and this suppression of the memory, cultural memory. Now, not only in countries like Ukraine, but many modern and postmodern families are no more storytelling communities. People are more influenced by the stories of heroes and stars of the soap operas in TV serials than their own ancestors. And young people, because it should create a personal identity. And when young people have no personal identity, they are looking for a collective identity, and there are especially the extreme groups, the sects and the extreme political groups, they are offering the collective identity, especially for those young people that are so confused about their own personal identity because it was not created, developed in their families. Daniel Hervé, the French sociologist of religion, wrote a book, Religion as a Chain of Memory. And her theory is religion is memory of society. And it is a very important aspect of social role of religion to keep the memory. And secularization is weakening of memory. I will return to this topic later. But globalization can also cause a clash of memories. They are blind spots and scars and wounds, traumas in the collective memories of certain groups. And there are conflicts of interpretation of the past between nations and political groups and religious groups. History is written by winners. And they are usually willing to remember only the victims they brought, and not the victims they caused. The victors, the winners, celebrated their own martyrs and heroes, but didn't speak about the victims of the others. And we should discover and rehabilitate the suppressed memory of the victims. Healing of memory is healing of history. History is not a closed treasure, selection of bruta facta. It's a vital river, and we are part of it. Our memories, interpretations, and reinterpretations are part of history. History is always an open story. Our personal and collective past is going with us. It's an important part of human experience. Our being in time. We have our own past. And our personal lives are open stories, but also churches, nations, and cultures, and we are part of it, are open stories, processes. There are communities of pilgrims. The Catholic Church defines herself as a community of pilgrims. And I think also the nations are communities of pilgrims. Tradition is very important, but tradition is a living stream of mutual recontextualization. The American historian of Christianity, Czech origin of Pelikan, said once, tradition is a living religion of the dead, and traditionalism is a dead religion of the living. And the German theologian Johann Baptist Metz wrote a very interesting thesis about the memory and the suppressed memory. He began with his own memory from his childhood, when he passed on his way to the school, the cathedral, Bamberg, and the portal and the gate of this cathedral were two statues. One statue was the ecclesia, was the church triumphant, and the second was the synagogue with the blind eyes, with the blinded eyes. And he asked himself once, what have seen those blinded eyes? And he started to develop his theology after Auschwitz and so on. He said for the Bible, history is a landscape of cry. In the mythologies of the nations and the ancient philosophies are some explanations of and rationalization of the experience with evil. But in the Bible it's not so. The Bible is a landscape of cry. In the preaching of prophets and in the Psalms is always why? The book of Job is full of this why, and all these things are open to the eschatological solution. Also the cry of Jesus on the cross, my God, why do you forsake me, is for Metz not a symbol of the cry of all victims in history. So to contemplate the cross is an opportunity to listen to the cry of the victims throughout the human history. They are suppressed memories. And what is suppressed? We know it from psychoanalysis. What is suppressed lives in unconsciousness, personal and collective unconsciousness. There is this forgotten or suppressed part of our historical memory, something like a complex in psychology. Suppressed lives in our subconsciousness and unconsciousness, and could be a concurrence with our ego. So it could cause the neurosis and disturbance of our consciousness, conscious life. So we need to liberate suppressed traumas and to put it on light and to speak about it. And what is on the personal level in the psychoanalysis, I think something similar should be on the historical level. I remember when I was in South Africa, I spoke with people. They were part of this these discussions, the opportunity of the oppressors and victims to sit together at the table, and after the fall of some totalitarian regimes, society is ill, society is scattered, and there are many wounds of history, and there are people, they suffer. Some of them wanted to have revenge. Some of them are so frustrated, they don't want to speak about it, they don't want to be active in life. And there are always people, they failed, they are guilty, but also the suppressed guilty is very, very, very dangerous. And after the fall of the authoritarian regimes, the victims and the people they caused all the violence must live together. And it's not easy. They are always too dangerous possible solutions to extremes: vengeance, which harm, revenge, violence, but also the opposite extreme, the omission, just to ignore the guilt, turn our back to forget it, and to forget and to forgive are two very different things. There are many these crimes or failure during the dictatorship, because they are in various ways guilty. Remember the famous book of Karl Jaspers about guilt, which was published after the Second World War. And I think that in such societies, and it was a problem for our society, I think it will be in Cuba something very similar very soon. The process of reconciliation is needed. The healing, the wounds of the past, the traumas, divisions, sometimes also in the families. And it is a moral, spiritual, and cultural problems. Not all guilt could be put before the courts. And I think it was very important what happened in the people, and the people they have done many evil things had the opportunity and duty to listen the feelings of their victims and to look into their eyes, which is sometimes more psychologically important than just the order of the courts. So I remember when John Shattuck was the former vice president of Harvard, and he was an ambassador in the Czech Republic after the fall of communism, and he asked me, who will produce this process of reconciliation in your society after communism? And it was the task which was not fulfilled because this forgiving is a process. It's not just to turn our who should be the expert for reconciliation and forgiveness, as the Christian churches. They have 1,000 years of experience with this. So forgiveness and reconciliation is a complicated process. The new birth, it's something which is connected with pain, as the birth process usually is. Truth must be told, only the truth can liberate us. And these hidden things needed to be named, and the offender should ask for forgiveness, and there must be some sort of penitence. And when the fake person may be finally a deeper personality than the others, but he needs much help, support, trust, acceptance, accompany this healing of communities. I remember in the 80s there was a BBC interview with Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he was asked, what will come after communism? And he said, "Будет долгая дорога выздоровления." It will be a long, long way of healing. And I think it's very, very, very important. So, this is also a contribution to the discussion with our friends from Cuba. I think if the transition from authoritarian regimes to democracy has to be successful, it means it is necessary to prepare the moral biosphere of democracy, moral revival of society, not before the fall of oppressive regime. The great and difficult mission is to find and prepare the moral leaders for the time of transition. There should be people with more authority, with courage, but also with moral and political vision for the future. And it is a problem. There are unfortunately not so many people like Václav Havel or Nelson Mandela in today's war. So healing the moral atmosphere is the task which has an important political consequences. But the politicians are not able to make it with the political instruments. The United States diplomacy has much experience with this semi-diplomatic role of churches and faith-based communities, and knows how to cooperate with them. I'm afraid that in European diplomacy there's not yet enough sensibility in these affairs. The church representatives should have some knowledge in political science to be able to play an important role in the transition process, to organize roundtables between government and opposition, like in Poland, to pacify the revolutionary emotions and violence and chaos. The Catholic Church played an important role in non-violent transition from authoritarian regimes, right-wings and left-wings as well, in Spain, in Argentina, in Chile, in Philippines, in Poland, and also the Catholic movements like San Egidio in Algeria, Kosovo, Guatemala, Uganda, Liberia, El Salvador, Angola, Burundi, Congo, Nicaragua, and Rwanda were quite an important role, because of the role of John Paul II. So I think communism is dead in Europe, but there are some countries with authoritarian regimes all over the world, Cuba as an example. And I would like to share our experiences, our positive experiences, but also speak frankly about our mistakes. I spoke some 15 years ago in Berlin about the role of historical memory in the process of European integration. Isn't something like a common European shared memory? Modernization is a process by which the main emphasis is transferred from the past, tradition, authority, to what points to the future. It is the past of reason from alliance with memory to alliance with will. The emergence of realm of tradition into the world of experiment, breakthrough into untested future. The European fascination of the future is the inheritance of eschatological focus of Christian faith. The biblical promise brought men on the side of eternal return of the same, turning this vision into the future. Gradually, the expectation of salvation and ultimate fulfillment moved from the horizon of eternity to the historical future. Joachim of Fiore, at the end of the 1st century, portrayed the mystery of the divine Trinity into history and brought into European consciousness an archetype of near expectant ages, age of the Holy Spirit, which is constantly returning in all sorts of arts. Europe is the mother of revolution, utopia, and the ideology of progress. From other civilizations, they are legitimized by their antiquity and are insight into the past. It is marked by the will to the new, this orientation toward the future in secular form or faith in progress. Faith in progress has passed Europe to its pairs, the United States of America and Soviet Russia, the America and Russia pairs of Europe. So revolution, utopia, and trust in progress tend to forget the past. They sacrifice past in the name of the future. If the turn to the future is accompanied by violence, there is a reason to censor collective memory. Secularization, nationalization have gone hand in hand. In Europe, European memory has fallen, shattered, and nationalized. The renewal of the common European memory implies the awakening of the conscious. Let us realize the hermeneutic circle between memory and conscience. It is important to know our own history and culture, to know the history, culture, the others, but what is this knowledge without conscience? Only the light of conscience can penetrate the dark chords of our memory, especially the collective memory. And at the same time, our conscience needs to go to the school of our historical memory so that it cannot be narcotized by the ideologies and myths. The effort to awaken a common European consciousness and conscience, which is necessary part of the deep part dimension of European integration, cannot be done without the reform of teaching national and religious history. It is not just about revising textbooks. It is an art to read our own history also from the perspective of others, even if it can mean a painful interference in the pillars of self-confidence, self-indulgence. Only truth can us liberate, and we need to see that truth look better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Halleck. I'm honored to be following you and for your wonderful opening remarks there. Thank you also to Martin and to the Green School for putting this on and for welcoming us here. My paper, or presentation, is entitled Memory as Confessio. And I take that from St. Augustine's Confessions. As a useful way of thinking about how we look back and interpret our past. That was Augustine's project in writing the Confessions, and it's useful to think of that model because it's a unique literary genre. I'm very pleased that Professor Francisco Plaza is here this afternoon, who's a former student of mine in the old days. And he's probably, unfortunately, heard this before, since he took my course on Christian political thought. But when we get to the Confessions, I usually explain to the students that this is not an autobiography, and it is not a memoir. But if any of them go out and leave me and write an autobiography or a memoir, I will track them down and shoot them. Because these are pieces of self-reporting that are purely, you could say, from the first-person point of view, and intended entirely to conceal and justify whatever that first person has done. Political memoirs being the most suspect of all of those categories. They're almost worthless from the point of view of knowing anything about what politically has happened, except how to conceal it. But Augustine in the Confessions does something quite different, and that is he puts himself in the presence of God and looks at himself and looks at his own life from the viewpoint of God. So the Confession as a literary genre, it consists of what Augustine does in that book, which is to accuse oneself before God and to praise God in return. And that seems to be the best way of arriving at historical truth. One of the dangers, of course, of people who do historical reconstruction, narrative, and compilation is that they very often have the impression that they are standing outside of history as eyewitnesses or as some sort of external observers. The reality, of course, is that we are in history. We are part of what is being examined in these cases. And so a big part of the role of any historian should be to accuse himself and to adopt the attitude of a penitent. In my paper, which you have to send to anybody who wants a copy of it, I suggest that one of the reasons why Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago was such a successful literary experiment is that it was not just a kind of compilation of records, although it was that. When Solzhenitsyn was in the camps, he decided that he would have to write the history of this infamous Gulag prison camp system that was all over the Soviet Union, and the millions of people who had perished in them. And so he did get actual individual experiences and narratives. He got individual prisoners to submit their stories to him. I think he had about 257, 258, somewhere in that vein. So it wasn't a comprehensive thing. But what made it a compelling work was that Solzhenitsyn included in that the story of his own soul. How he went into the camp, believing, more or less supporting the communist regime, the communist ideology. Then he became silent in the arguments that occurred in the camps. And then eventually he realized that he would have to oppose the communist ideology. Now, so that's merely the external story of what happens with Solzhenitsyn. Inwardly, what happens is a fundamental change of heart, a fundamental change of who he was. When he went in, the first thing he had to do was find a bone. He looked at the guy who was the weakest in the whole place, an old man who was on his last legs, about to die, and he tossed him out of his bunk. Things proceeded in this way. He later was pressed into service as an informer in the camps. Not that he was a big-time informer, but he did, cooperate. He realized that, there is a kind of turning point in which a person asks themselves, am I going to do anything to survive? Or is there a limit beyond which I cannot go? That was the story. That was the story that Solzhenitsyn recounts in the Gulag collection, and it's what gives a sort of moral authority or clarity to everything that he puts in there. Towards the very end, he has this wonderful chapter called The Ascent, which, if you haven't looked at it, is definitely kind of the spiritual high point of the whole narrative. In The Ascent, he recalls how one night an old doctor called Boris Kornfeld told him that what he should do is to spend his time thinking about all of his own faults and asking himself, what was it in my life that merited this punishment? And he proceeded with that as a way of, you could say, undergoing his own purgative or spiritual way, his own ascent from the depths, as he called it. That's at the level of what we would call the personal story, the personal perspective, which is, in the end, the ultimate horizon that all of us bring to any task. How we stand in relation to the truth of things, which is really the perspective of eternity. History is not therefore a collection of facts. It is, you could say, our standing in relation to the eternal judgment. But it's not simply a personal affair. It's also, as Monsignor Halleck mentioned, a collective, social, and you could say multi-generational historical affair. And when we grapple with the question of the past, your mention of the German case and Karl Jasper's the question of guilt and so on. It's useful to keep in mind that other societies have grappled with these things, the Germans in particular, and they have this wonderful work overcome it. And one of the big temptations was to just simply collect all the data, all the facts, all the information, and say, here it is. But that doesn't quite do it. It leaves, it left the Germans, I think, and very often leaves all of these official education programs and memorials and admonitions and so on, with the big sense that, well, all we have is a terrible disaster that happened way back there in the past, and that has nothing much to do with us today. The reality is, of course, that none of that would have happened if there had not been a fairly widespread collaboration with those events. A willingness to ignore them, a willingness to bypass them, a willingness to refuse to question them. The 20th century experience of the totalitarian nightmare and horror is an experience that, as a political scientist and as people who look at political reality, we have to ask ourselves, how could an entire society collaborate, or very large sections of modern societies collaborate with what is essentially evil on a mass scale? Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag makes a crucial point, which is that none of this would really have happened without the presence of ideology. There's a striking discussion where he explains how different ordinary criminals are to the Eichmanns, the great totalitarian killers, and all of the willing collaborators, the camp guards, and everybody else, the people who ran the trains, everything that went into it. All of whom thought that they were just doing their jobs. This is what Hannah Arendt refers to as the banality of evil. That evil could be committed on such a scale that people did not recognize it as evil. Ordinary criminals, by contrast, have trouble going to sleep. One of my favorite movies is with Robert De Niro called Analyze This. He's a mob boss. He's been hiking people all over town. And all of a sudden he starts having panic attacks. And so he goes to a psychiatrist. Billy Crystal is the psychiatrist. And Billy Crystal has to treat him for panic attacks, which come as a result of killing too many people. That's not the problem when you think that what you're doing is perfectly fine or is good. And that is the crucial role of ideology. Robert De Niro had no ideology to support him. He was just a criminal with a bad conscience. To really kill people on a mass scale, you have to have a good conscience. And that's what ideology did. So the power of ideas, the power of particularly ideologies of the most militant type. The militant ideologies of human perfection and transformation are what gave to the 20th century a kind of carte blanche or permission to destroy human beings on a mass scale. So it's not just the individual failures, the individual crimes, but there is a kind of collective insanity and a collective failure here. And it's more widely shared than we're perhaps prepared to admit. One of the books in which I've dealt with this is called After Ideology, and I was very happy to come across a statement that John Paul II, St. John Paul II, gave in 1982 to the European bishops, and this fits, I think, with Monsignor Senior's remarks about Christianity in Europe, in which he remarked to the European bishops that the crisis of modern man and the crisis of European man in the 20th century is part of the crisis of Christianity. That Christianity itself even bears some responsibility for this. Because it is through Christianity that this idea of a transformation of human nature is introduced into history. And indeed, an eschatological end of all things. Albert Camus had a similar view on it. And it's interesting to see the Pope admit that yes, there is even that dimension. Now, what does that mean? And what do we conclude from that admission? There are two things that could, two possible implications or conclusions that could be drawn out of that. The first is that religion is a bad thing, and that therefore, and Christianity, including Christianity, and that we should have nothing more to do with it, and that we should simply build a secular society. The other is to think, well, really, these ideological distortions, this ideological madness through which we've lived, cannot simply be opposed, cannot simply be eliminated merely by avoiding what we call metaphysical questions, questions about the ultimate meaning and destiny of human beings, but that it must also include a more adequate response to precisely those questions. Albert Camus talks about metaphysical rebellion as being at the root of it all. And he says that it's driven by an impatience with limits and a demand to go beyond all limits. And therefore, he counsels us to live within an order of limits, to live within kind of a nothing too much idea. But even Camus eventually concedes that to live within an order of limits, to accept the limits of the human condition, and to not seek a transformation beyond it, requires a kind of unconditional openness, which is not really provided by a purely rational order of things. The utopian dreams, the dreams of perfection, are dreams that come legitimately from the human heart. And they are not simply an accidental byproduct of religion, but religion is itself one of the ways in which it is most fully, in which they are most fully satisfied. When I look at when I look at the way in which the horrors of the past are addressed, they seem to be best addressed by those who suffer through them most deeply and bear witness to what we might call a kind of secular sainthood that goes beyond them. There is a heroic dimension, particularly to those movements of resistance to the totalitarian oppression, which cannot be accounted for purely in rational, self-interested terms. In order to build just societies, we have to be able to make, you could say, a transcendent pledge to one another, to regard each human being as an inexhaustible center of meaning and value in the universe. At its best, this is what these great emancipatory movements aimed at. They did indeed aim at a certain level at the highest and best in human beings, but they were tragically flawed, tragically distorted. Those who opposed them most successfully, I think, have been people who worked their way through the crisis to arrive at the fullest affirmation of what a human life should be about. They reach the conclusion that self-sacrifice is the true path of fulfillment and of the fullest realization of human community in society and history. Even today, thinking in terms of the recent death of Liu Xiaobo in China, it's striking that here we have an individual who bore heroic witness in a way that could never be suppressed, and that has within it great beauty, great heroism, and great selflessness, so that when China, even though it's no longer you could say, controlled by the militant version of communism, it still maintains an ideological style, an ideological guise that eventually will have to be thrown off. When that day comes, Liu Xiaobo will be their George Washington, or their heroic figure from the past, who will be the basis on which a newly humane society can be built. The dissident movements that you've all been so much part of, and that is inspiring the postbellum exercise here, is not simply a matter of preserving a factual account, or even overcoming the past, as the Germans called it, mastering the past. It is really a means of preserving the best of which human beings have been capable. And it is on the basis of that best that human society can be renewed. Thank you very much.
So it's quite difficult to speak after these great speeches of professors. Well, I will speak mainly about our work and my own experience with making the interviews. So, we started in 2001, and the main idea was to give more place for talking about testimonies and give the eyewitnesses some biggest context in which they can tell their story. And during the next years, we have collected about 5,000 interviews. Personally, I was leading about 150 or 200 interviews with survivors of Holocaust, war veterans, or political prisoners of 50s, or dissidents, and so on and so on. So I will try to share with you my own experience and trying to somehow reflect in the whole debate about reconciliation, because the reconciliation is not yet finished in Czech Republic still, after the 28 years after the fall of communism. still there's a huge debate about some particular presence which are very important in our society, who are somehow involved in the secret police. And they are still is very powerful in the society. And the debate, how is it possible that this situation is somehow going to the bad way, I think. So it looks like that the reconciliation is much deeper process than it was looked like before. After the fall of regime, everybody was talking that it's just few years, and after that we will be democratic society as a Western civilization and all these countries in Europe as well. So let me share my personal memory with you, which will hopefully illustrate what I mean to say. The original idea of Postbellum was to give eyewitnesses, the direct actors of big history, the opportunity to recall their experiences in the broader context of their whole life. In 2004, 3 years after we have established our organization, my brother and I and a few friends set off to a small town in Prague to visit a community of Bolanian Czechs. Those were people who had been born in Czech communities in Ukraine. They witnesses Stalin's terror, Nazi occupation, when they saw heavily combat against the German in the Eastern Front while serving in the Czechoslovak Foreign Army. When the war ended and the communists came to power in Czechoslovakia, many of them suffered years of hardship in communist concentration camps. The reason was usually that they had seen how communism worked in practice while they were still in Ukraine. The new regime was afraid that they might share their experience with other citizens or stand up in open resistance to the totalitarian state. I recorded the memories of Mr. František Šťastný. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for high treason in a political trial after the war. The radiation he had been exposed to in the communist uranium mines had turned his feet black. He shouldn't walk properly. Mr. Šťastný lived by himself. His wife had died several years before. He had no children. We recorded several hours of material together. At the end of it, he admitted that he had never told his life story to anyone else before, not even to his wife. His experience had been so traumatizing that he hadn't wanted to share the pain with those dearest to him. It was easier for him to talk about his hardship with a stranger, with me. Later, I experienced similar situations again and again. With surprising frequency, in the following years, I encountered and in a way also participated in the first formulation of the life story of the people who had stepped out from or were forcefully thrown out of their private lives and thrown into the big history events. Many of the witnesses that I had opportunity to interview suffered from deep wounds. Some, I would even say, were broken people. Others were imbued with an incredible spiritual vitality. Mr. Šťastný was perhaps both of these cases combined. When we finished the interview and I had switched off my recording device, Mr. Šťastný quietly saw me out of his home. It was Friday evening, and as it is custom in Czech Republic, my colleagues and my brother and I sat down for a drink of beer and in one of the local pubs. We talked about these witnesses and their lives late into the night. We were all full full of the stories we had just been told. But our emotions didn't just stem from the advantageous nature of the stories of these Czechs. I think we were touched by something much deeper. Even before this recording seasons, my colleague and I had a relatively good idea about the history of Czech minority in Ukraine. But the direct confrontation with living memory, or I dare to say, witnessing the past become present in the stories of the actual actors of this historical phenomenon, changed us somehow. To paraphrase German philosopher Edmund Husserl, we experience a transformation of the broader horizon in which historical fact, in these cases regarding the lives of the Czech minority in Ukraine, are imbued with life. I don't mean to say that the witness had caused doubt on the authenticity of some archival material, or he had refuted the historical community's general interpretation of the given events, although I have experienced this several times as well. Rather, what I mean is that our previous understanding of the past, acquired from history books, suddenly seems gray, lifeless, and barely of any use anymore. We haven't conducted this deeper reflection. One important aspect of this transformation of horizons, which I experienced thanks to Mr. Stasny and many other witnesses, is that we are no longer passive recipients of the story during the interviews. We aren't just kind of recording device that merely stores the person's history as a copy of the original. When recording, we are the ones who ask questions. We are smiling, shake our heads, react to what have just been told. Sometimes we also confront the witnesses with other original sources. That's all part of the process. These two perspectives, mine and the witnesses who wants to tell me something, affect each other in a dialogue. In this context, I think Hans-Georg Gadamer is speaking about fusion of horizons of understanding. And yet the base matter is still the memories of the actor of the past. I dare to say that it is this open dialogue that creates an environment in which a new horizon may arise, and in which we, perhaps also the witness himself, may experience a transformation of our understanding of the past. Some historians object, saying human memory is selective. People have a tendency to lie, to exaggerate their role they have played in the event. They paint themselves in better colors. Numerous psychological studies have described this phenomenon quite convincingly. Furthermore, the stupid question we ask during the interviews, or some inappropriate reaction of ours, can distort the witness's testimony. That all may be true, but the consistent alternative is to depersonalize the dialogue without faces. I think that the interview conducted with the aim of obtaining only the raw material as just another archival sources free of subjectivity may have a certain degree of factual accuracy, but at the same time we are in danger of missing the whole picture, failing to reach the horizon of understanding on both sides, and thus losing our chance of Gadamer's fusion of horizons, which leads to understanding of different quality. From my own experience, I can confirm that the recording of life stories is not a safe path to take. It is an adventure with an uncertain result. You never know ahead of the time, if by the end of it you will be able to honestly say to yourself, I understand something at least a bit better now. You are often left with a bitter aftertaste of things left unsaid. The bad feelings that you should have had the courage to ask about something directly. But I believe that confronting the life stories of real people and recording them plays an irreplaceable part in becoming to terms with the past and reconciling ourselves with it, if need be. Because this dialogue, this living memory, can overcome the gap between the past, which has ceased to be, and the present, which has no duration, and becomes the past. It is up to us if we let it be forgotten completely. Thank you.
But also students can really make a great contribution. Thank you very much, Martin. So, first reaction comes from Orlando.
Okay, should I go by each panelist?
As you wish.
Okay. I've organized this in two ways, two sections. One is commentaries on each presenter, and then how it relates to Cuba. There. I've organized this in two ways, and I'll be as to the point as I can. First, comments on the presentations, which I was privileged to hear, and then a second part, which I apply what I gained from those presentations to Cuba and the process taking place in Cuba. What I gained from Monsignor Malik's presentation was, and I think we're building on what we left off in the last conference, was this conception of memory and remembering as two distinct but perpendicular processes. As types of awareness and as segments of consciousness. Memory can lead to reconciliation inasmuch as an experience that is shared, albeit from different perspectives, is fully explored by those who partake of it in order to absorb all of its meaning. So, memory is the perpetuation of that experience that goes beyond, like Cuba now said, a past which is no longer occurring, and a present which is undefined in its duration. It's the weight of the experience. Only by separating the weight of the experience, which is timeless in a people or an individual, from a certain chronology of events, can we distinguish evil from the evildoer, and in this manner address the cause of the pain which has been inflicted of society, and re-establish the pillars or the standards of a new society, of a new stage of the experience of the pilgrim community, be it nation, church, or state. The notion of this moral biosphere, or this moral environment in the transition to democracy can only be attained through the restoration of the meaning of the experience, which binds the community together in that part. And this phrase, which Monsignor Malik mentioned or stated, only the light of conscience can penetrate darkness, the darkness of our memory. So the process of reconciliation is the re-establishment of this light of consciousness, which restores the full meaning of the experience and holds it up to a transcendent standard within our own self and within our collective soul. From Professor Walsh's presentation, which to me is of extreme interest, I'm going to begin with an experience I had several weeks past. I heard a recording of a 1-hour interview that Che Guevara gave at the Cuban UN mission in New York in 1964, where he had extensive interviews with journalists who sympathized with his ideas. I had never heard Ernesto Guevara speak. I've been familiar with him my entire life since I was a child in Cuba and his image was everywhere. But I had never heard him speak and reason with a group of philosophers. And what struck me most about Guevara, and Vogelin came to mind as I listened to him, was his insanity. And when I say insanity, is his willful disconnection from reality. His utmost conviction that he had crash-landed on a society and had discovered a way of destroying evil by killing evildoers. And it comes to mind, in 1964, as this man is speaking of a brighter future for mankind, how ignorant he was about basic human realities, about basic notions of Cuban history, and how profoundly convinced he was that their task had been an impossible task that only madmen could accomplish. And over and over and over again in the interview, he refers to Los Locos, we the insane ones, the mad ones who have done this. We have found a way towards the future, and it's by killing those who are bad. And this is, remember, he's giving this interview right after he had just stood up in the UN and said that they will continue executing, they will continue with the firing wall, they will continue with a massive execution of those who were opposed. And what came to mind to me was political Gnosticism. He was profoundly convinced that through bloodshed, and he was uniquely endowed to carry out this bloodshed, the world could be saved. And then there's a part where it would be funny, but when it's so tragic, he says, the revolution will be carried out because there are enough of us crazy people in the world to carry it out. Well, the revolution led him to Congo where he fell, and to Bolivia where they killed him. So what comes to mind is when Professor Walsh gives this excellent explanation of the Confessions and of the Gulu Archipelago and how we bring it together, is that what St. Augustine is teaching us is how to objectivize an essentially subjective experience so that we can regain an accurate perception of the truth. Whereas Guevara is completely submerged in his own ego and the fact that he can define what's good and evil and what's right and wrong and who lives and who dies, Augustine is transmitting to us that a full awareness of ourselves requires an awareness, a sustained inquiry into what lies beyond ourselves, or beyond what we have defined as ourselves. There is no room for dissonance in Che Guevara's speech. It sounds like philosophy. He believes it's philosophy, but there's no self-criticism. Whereas in Augustine, it's all about self-criticism in the light of a greater truth, which defines what we are. And it came to mind that ideology, or at least militant ideology, or at least Gnosticism, political Gnosticism, is the opposite of what Augustine and Solzhenitsyn had tried to do. The subjectivization of objective experience in order to fully attain sectarian objectives. So the struggle against totalitarianism becomes the struggle for the restoration of sanity of an entire society. How to restore the proper relation between the ego and truth, between the ego and reason. And in that process, heroic self-sacrifice, which is completely rational, but within a broader view of rationality, as Martin White so presented so well in his books, is indispensable. And that leads me to Krupa's presentation. When he said that reconciliation is a deeper process than we had originally imagined in the Czech Republic, I think that's completely accurate. I think that reconciliation is a sustained process of society that has gone through totalitarianism, through Holocaust, through extermination. We'll never overcome that wound. We must learn to deal and live with that wound. And I think a great deal of Cuba's tragedy lies with the fact that we've never been able to reconcile the multiple wounds of totalitarianism and authoritarianism that we have suffered in our history. Beginning with the Spanish genocide against the Cubans in the Wars of Independence, to lastly Fidel Castro. And the notion of the witness to the witness serves as a crucial bridge in the objectivization of this subjective experience. In other words, addressing that past which no longer exists in order to save this present which we have not defined. The fact that we remember, that we help to remember, that we help to fully draw the meaning of that memory is what restores the experience and makes living in a present which we have now defined as a new time possible at all. Lastly, referring to Cuba, I think that from all three panelists, again, the idea of the restoration of the sanity of the collective soul as a process that is broken down into individual souls, which impress upon the collective soul the model or the path towards the restoration of reason. And two examples came to mind. I think the only instrument available is not literature, there's other instruments. Right now in the Frost Museum here in FIU, and I invite you all to pass by and see it, there's an excellent exhibit of a great Cuban painter, Rafael Soriano, who died in exile. And to me it's fascinating because it depicts, in his paintings, it depicts his evolution as a painter from the Cuba of the 1950s that seemed so economically progressive, socially open, with political problems but addressing the future. It's a painting of fine geometrical shapes coinciding in bright colors. And it follows that evolution to exile and to his death, and the paintings become more mystical, more transcendent, more eternal. And Soriano writes, "The anxieties and sadness of exile brought in me an awakening. I began to search for something else. It was through painting and through my reflection upon it that I went from geometric painting to a painting that is spiritual. I believe in God. I believe in the Spirit." And the second person that came to me, who I believe is one of these Cuban souls who are individually addressing and trying to restore sanity, is someone whom I wish all the speakers here would have met, and it's Jorge Valls Arango. He was a Cuban revolutionary of deep Catholic convictions who spent 20 years in prison. And Jorge Valls was a great writer, a great philosopher, and who died a few years back, 2 years ago. He said that a generation of heroes had to be followed by a generation of martyrs. And what he meant by that was that in self-sacrifice, through the defense of eternal values and principles which transcend the historical chronological moment, is the only way to restore sanity to a society which has reached a level of violence that it has attacked itself. So it is with those words that I conclude, and I thank you again, Martin, for inviting me to do this.
Thank you very much for following, observing the time, such as this. I would now ask the audience, do you have any short intervention or question? And if you have, please do it now. And then I will ask the panelists for final reaction from their side. So please. I see Joe. So please try to be brief and continue to do lecture.
Yes, I will be very brief. My questions, they will be very, very short to Professor Walsh. You put a great deal of emphasis on ideology. So I have three very brief questions. What was the ideology of Genghis Khan? I mean, he was a murderer, like, you know, one of the worst we have seen in the world. Second, what was the ideology of the Roman Empire when it destroyed Carthage? And third, don't you think that your statement that to build a just society is that what we want is not also an ideology?
Thank you very much. Lisa, and then Bill, you too.
Thank you so much. I come from a country, Venezuela, that shares with Cuba the tragedy of living under totalitarianism. So we appreciate very much this event, and I'm very happy to be here to see Dr. Walsh again, and also to see people that I'm getting to know personally, but that I admire very much. In Venezuela, we have had Havel as a guide, as an important guide in our own fight, and just wanted to, drawing on your experience in our fight in Venezuela, we have recognized that it is not just a matter of confronting a regime. It has to do with even our own national, personal identity. Things like what Martin Luther King said about segregation come to mind. You know, not only segregation is an injustice, but destroys the person that suffers, because it introduces so many elements of hatred, of anger in his heart, that makes him, it's almost heroic for him to love. So it destroys the human, the victim. In our case, then, we have tried to understand that we're not just fighting a regime, that we are fighting for our own being, our own truth as human beings. And in that sense, as Dr. Walsh mentioned, of course, one of the things that has happened in Venezuela, which is also the case in Czechoslovakia, it's also the case in Cuba, is that we have this second reality of regime erecting a distorting reality, creating an imaginary world. And it all began when Chavez began his presidency, eliminating every past history. History would begin with him and he would erase everything that happened before. So one of the activities that in our battle against our regime has been to restore the past. That is part of who we are. We cannot allow that to be eliminated. And then when it comes to the present as such, also trying to follow the example of Havel and others, we have tried to break through the totalitarian lie by our own suffering, to see if we could make the perpetrators reach that point that, and Dr. Walsh mentioned about Solzhenitsyn, is there a point, a limit beyond which I cannot go? And in the recent months we had brave young men offering their lives. Our hopes were very high. We thought, this has to produce a dramatic change in their conscience. That there's going to be a point where they have to realize, I cannot go anymore. But the opposite happened. Perhaps this is the most difficult moment in Venezuela now, because not only did that not happen, they became even more cruel, but a significant portion of our society is almost, I don't want to say it, but almost thinking, well, perhaps that second reality that the regime offers is at least more comfortable. It doesn't make me, or demand from me any act of heroism, so I'd rather just go back to my daily routine, which is harsh, which is horrible, but at least more comfortable. So I don't know, Ambassador, if this is a question or just an appeal to people that have gone through these experiences, and our Cuban friends who are like our older brothers in this suffering.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask panelists just to make their rather brief final comments, just to wrap up the whole discussion, because then we need to clear the space for the panel too. So who actually wants to? Okay, so whoever wants to say something.
Well, let me respond particularly to the question on ideology, which is a great question, and I'm very grateful for you raising the question, because even though the term is commonly used, we do not have an agreed on notion of what an ideology is. Hispanic-Iran is any collection of ideas. When I use the term ideology, I mean militant revolutionary movements of universal human transformation. What Marx called changing human nature on a mass scale. How is that different? It's a very good question. How is it different from the various orgies of destruction that we see throughout human history? Genghis Khan and the Romans are not the only ones. There's plenty of examples that we could call upon. There are two things that we said in response to that. One is that, yes, there is something comparable about those moments in which a large group of people engaged in an orgiastic destruction of others. How does that come about? It's like any time we have to kill people, we have to cross a boundary that is hard to cross, but once you've crossed it, it becomes very easy. Once you've gone beyond that line, then killing people becomes very easy, and it's almost routine. This is, after all, what military training aims at bringing about. Bringing about that point where we lose our normal inhibitions about the violence we can perpetrate on others, and can do it much more freely. That's not the same as the kind of destruction that we're talking about, though, within the totalitarian regimes. Those are by and large programs of destruction that are carried out in a much more routine way and by people who are not really, you could say, pressed into a military service, but are, selected because they have certain, you could say, almost pathological qualities, and they're supported by others who fail to ask the questions that would check that. But essentially, this is, when we talk about the destruction of human beings in the 20th century, or any of these genocidal cases, you can say the Rwanda massacre, any of these things, these are situations in which human beings are involved in a systematic process of murder, extermination, and they proceed along the lines essentially of a modern industrial operation in which everybody plays a part and no one kind of loses their emotional self-control, but they simply engage in it as if they are part of an efficient killing machine. And that's not destruction taken as a whole. Now, what makes that possible is that they have this sense that this is part of a systematic way of understanding who we are in the order of things. They no longer feel personal guilt in it. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't back there an awareness that the ideology is false. It's a brilliantly false scheme, but false nevertheless. And that falsehood it may not be that everybody understands, that everybody can pinpoint exactly what it is that is wrong with the scheme in which, for the sake of saving humanity, we kill an awful lot of human beings. Yes, people can be gullible. They can indeed fall into, you could say, forgetfulness and ignorance and an inability to question things. But there are enough that know that the whole operation is hollow to the core. And Orlando's example of Che Guevara is really a very, very fine one, I think. And I must get that reference from him because people who engage in a mad activity in the knowledge that it's mad are appalling and impressive at the same time. And that's basically what we're talking about with these movements of these militant ideological drives of total transformation.
Okay, so I think that all participants deserve a round of applause. No break. Now Richard Cohen is taking over, and I would like to ask the second panelist just to come up here, and we will do the break afterwards.
Those that can hear us, and it will be obedient. I think we can begin. I've got so many pages of notes listening to the marvelous first panel, but I'm still reminded that on our way here, Martin Paulus pointed to the sign that is etched up in the university, which says, what was thought to be impossible is now soon to be regarded as inevitable. So, given that we've got just an hour this panel to accomplish the impossible, I hope that at least something of that value will seem to be inevitable in the course of our talks. I think all I would say is that I'm not going to introduce the panelists. This does remove the pleasure one has that as the moderator goes on about the achievements of particular panelists, it's fun looking at the face of the person concerned to see how they react. You won't have that this time. Martin describes his and my job as being a moderator. I don't intend to moderate our panel at all, in the sense of making what they say more moderate. But I hope that we'll be having a conversation. So each member of the panel will describe for themselves who they are, what they've done, what they hope to be their main area of interest in what follows. And then we'll deal with some of the issues, not least thrown up by the previous discussions. Anyway, on to Professor Kramer to introduce himself.
Thank you very much. I am a poor substitute on this panel, so I hope you will allow me to join the distinguished panel here in the distinguished gathering. I'm certainly not a scholar, as the description up there suggests, a gathering of scholars. I'm more of a practitioner and a former diplomat, having served 8 years in the State Department and 4 years as president of Freedom House. My regional background is in the Eurasia region, Soviet Union, Russia, Ukraine, and the countries in that region, so I'll be happy to talk about memory and conflict and reconciliation in that context.
Everyone here is called Martin, at least half of us. Martin Petlin, can you also?
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Martin Petrdio. I am coming from Poznań, from the Czech Republic, from our NGO, where we together with Martin Krupa work together. I'm a fundraiser there, and before I was involved also in other organizations. Maybe if I go from the beginning, I was also, for example, half a year in China teaching English, by the way. And then I also worked for the Ministry of Environment, and I was also for a while sent to be a designation expert in the European Commission in environmental issues, I have to say, not in historical issues. And then I also worked for the Institute of Botany of the Academy of Sciences, not as a researcher, but as a fundraiser. I was trying to find suitable funds, and this is what I'm doing until now in our organization, and rather writing those grants, like also was this month, which right now we can use right now for discussing about Cuba, Cubans, and how to record the dissidents, how to distribute this information, how to mediate them. And my wish to maybe discuss here would be that which difficulties in fact we meet with as NGO when we are doing such a job, who can help us, who helps us already. And also my wish would be to discuss here what will know my kids, in fact, about what has happened either in my country or in Cuba in previous 20th century, and in fact in Cuba until now, and how to help, in fact, Cubans, because they need to get some help with this issue which they have, and what experiences can help them from us.
Thank you. Our third panelist is Rosa Maria Pérez. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so sorry for the delay, especially with the previous panelists. My name is Rosa Maria Pérez. I'm Cuban. I'm not a scholar at all. My background is in physics. I'm an activist in my country, and I think also in the region. Because of the influence and the toxicity of the totalitarian regime is not just limited to my island. It's not, the damage is not limited to the Cubans. I have the honor of being the president of the Latin American Youth Network for Democracy that gathers organizations of all Latin America that are interested and are preoccupied actually by the destiny of the democracy in the whole continent. And I also have the honor of being the daughter of Oswaldo Paya. My father dedicated his life to try to bring democracy to the island, to fight for the most basic human natural rights. And he was killed 5 years ago by that regime that is very persistent and is very preoccupied for Cubans recovering their own memory and for Cubans being exposed to the naked facts. That was part of what my father was doing, and that was linked to a real proposal for change. That is what actually transformed a human being in a totalitarian state in a risk to the power. When the truth and the proposal for change are linked. That was my father's job. I think that my father embodies also that alternative, and that's why he was killed. And that's also why they lie about his killing, and not just his killing, but the killing of thousands of Cubans that have died pursuing freedom and pursuing a better destiny for all of us. So about that, I will be talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Our fourth panelist is Sebastian Arcos.
Good afternoon. My name is Sebastian Arcos. I'm the Associate Director for the Cuban Research Institute on the campus. Sorry. Okay. I was a dissident in Cuba for a number of years with the Cuban Committee for Human Rights before I left the island in 1992. I have been involved in Cuba, thinking Cuba, and discussing Cuba ever since. And today I want to talk about the challenges and the possibilities of reconciliation in the case of Cuba.
Thank you. One of the thoughts I had listening to the previous panel was that history has two meanings. It's both the past and what people tell us, either orally or in writing or other means, what we should believe is the past. And I was wondering if I could ask you, Martin, first of all, when you were conducting these important and moving interviews, how you separated the past from what people say is the past.
Well, in fact, we don't separate past. It's with them. We want to, in fact, let's say, I don't know how to say it exactly, but we want to get the best from their past for the future ones, you know, because this is in fact the message that they give us, and that's how we do it. We let them speak as they speak. They open their hearts, in fact, you know, and that's something different when you compare it with textbooks. Textbooks are simply a text without emotions. And this difference is really the most emotive, I would say, even for those who then listen to them when they watch their movies. And such witnesses, such their memories and the ways they tell it to you are much more passionate. And then you understand the history and your past, past of your fathers, mothers, much better than it was than if you read the book.
So you don't think it's your job to judge or to shape the material?
Absolutely not. This is not our take it as here is the mirror from somebody's past. Watch it, listen to it, and it is up to you as a listener, as the observer, to say yourself, well, what was wrong, what was good. Simply use your brain. Don't stay just without emotions. My feeling is, you know, when I do it right now, only for the second year, but still, I have a feeling like that when you listen to these stories, and you have a feeling that even it can change the ways of learning history. Because I have a feeling that simply the textbooks can become a little bit useless. Not too much useless, of course. You know, some data you will have to learn anyway. But you will much better understand what has happened in comparison to what simply the books cannot give you.
Now, the rest of the panel do jump in. Don't be too polite. But so, what are the difficulties in being an oral historian?
Difficulties. I don't know what the difficulties. First difficulty is that these witnesses are not here forever. And once they die, you don't have a chance to catch that message and to provide it further on. This is what happened, for example, to me when we were preparing to come here. My wish was to visit one veteran from the World War II who was of Czech origin. Well, he was fighting, by the way, for the US Army in the Philippines. And we wanted to record him already in May. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to come to him, and I was calling 2 weeks ago to his son and daughter. They informed me that unfortunately he's dead. And then you see that simply this is our biggest difficulty we have, that it's a time. Of course, we have technical problems, like you think that just to download the video is pretty easy today to the YouTube, but it doesn't have the quality, it's very long. Just one story you record takes 4 hours. Who's got today time for 4 hours to watch witness and to listen to his story? So you have to make it short as well, somehow to digest the information from that video or from that audio information. So it's time. Also personal capacities you have to have. If you don't have money, you don't have people, you don't have anything. Well, these are the big limits we have. And yeah, by the way, if you have also a video and you want to share it, the upload system, it's also very it's technically consuming. It's not easy to just to share one video when 5,000 or 50,000 people want to watch it at the moment, at once.
If I can ask you a question. Martin was sending me papers he wrote, and one of the things I know he was interested in, he wrote about the ethical demands of a liberal democracy facing human rights abuses in other countries. And I don't know here how many of you are not either Czech or Cuban, but I think Cubans and Czechs make up the majority of people here. And it's extraordinary and a wonderful thing that the Czech Republic is initiating what we are now discussing. What are you hoping to come of this association? I'm asking you because you're involved in trying to change Cuba. What are you hoping will come from the Czech Republic's law?
I think that there are, thank you. I think that there are a lot of similarities. We share a big part of our sufferings, actually. Czechs understand what is to live under surveillance, understand what is to live without the most basic liberties, understand what is to go to prison or to lose someone because they have a difference of opinion. At the same time, I think that totalitarians have also learned about history. They have also studied what happened in Czech Republic, what happened in Eastern Europe, actually what happened during the Arab Spring. They are actually practicing how to kill the springs in Venezuela. So that I think that the best things or the best way to do or the best way to go is to share the experiences, not trying to apply the same recipes, but trying to find that new ways that we need to find together. For sure that the Czech experience and the Czech support, and now talking like institutionally and publicly, and it would be even better if that support is since the Czech state, since the Czech government, since the European Union, and became much more practical and useful, not just for Cubans, but also for Venezuelans and for other countries in the region that are actually suffering these authoritarian regimes that are all combined and that are all coordinated. So that these spaces are very useful to share that experience, are even more important in the measure that these conversations are going to be used to go to the right proposals. On the strategic line and also on the practical line of what to do and what to demand from those governments that are the representative of populations that have suffered the same thing that we are suffering right now.
People say that for totalitarian governments, memory is their enemy. Do you feel that?
Well, when I was trying to write some things for this space, I immediately remember Milan Kundera saying that the struggle of the man against power is the struggle of the memory against the forgetting. And forgetting is the first task in a totalitarian state. I mean, if we have to talk about what have been like the main steps that the so-called Cuban Revolution or this criminal regime has accomplished from the beginning, the first one was for sure to try to not such erase as distort memory, to change and to transform and to distort everything that people know. Of course, that is not that easy at the beginning because the memory of the past is the past is still too recent. So they killed thousands of Cubans. There are more than 4,000 of Cubans that have been killed in the first 3-4 years of the so-called revolution. That is more than the Chileans that were killed under Pinochet dictatorship in 17 years. But the account of the history of the Cuban people haven't been completely, and that's simply because we are still living under a totalitarian state. But it was not enough to kill the people. It was not enough to put in prison or to force to exile the most braver souls among the Cubans. They need also not just to eliminate the spokespersons, not just to eliminate the eloquent souls. They also need to eliminate references. And that's why the totalitarian regime in Cuba starts from the beginning, a de-Christianization process. And a process that was directly against any moral reference from the past or from the society, different from the new communist moral or the new loyalty that was the loyalty to the new leader and to the new party. And that process have continued in the history and have passed also by the second step, that is just to start to lie about their real intentions, but also about the real life of the real people that was living on the island, causing this so well-known anthropological damage that human beings that live under the regime suffer.
One of the things I was told yesterday is that you can return to be in Cuba, to live in Cuba. Is this a sign that events are turning from conflict to reconciliation? And I was surprised to be given such a feeling.
The fact that I'm going, that I could enter and leave the country? Well, the strange things that happen to the people that live in totalitarian states is that when we start to obtain some small permissions that are not even rights, that are still dependent on the will of the totalitarian regime, but as they just kidnap all the human rights, they just kidnap all the guarantees and all the liberties of the people. When they made small changes. When they did some tiny little pieces of freedom, then the rest of the world say, hey, they are changing. Now you are in an opening process. And this is just not true. It's just part of what totalitarians have learned during the last 35 years. They don't need to look so totalitarians anymore. They could play with the symbols of the free world. Actually, they play the whole time. They put Obama on Havana. They put the Rolling Stones in Havana. Now Chanel can make a show on the Havana Malecón, and that does not mean that Cubans have the same rights that the young people that were singing rock and roll after the Berlin Wall collapse achieved. They just learn how to play with that symbols, and they are playing in order to keep the power and in order to keep all the resources and all the privilege that they have. The difference, and I will finish right now, the difference between a right and a permit is crucial. What we Cubans have, some of us, is some permits, some permissions. I can enter the island and I only can leave because the Cuban regime allowed me. In the moment that they want, they stop me because I'm not the recipient of a right. I have a permission. And that's why my mother was detained on the airport on the island a month ago and was returned to the United States after 4 years of living out of the island. And that main difference is the one that is crucial for the world to understand if they are going to be truly solidarious with us, and if we are going actually to go in the path of a real transition process and not in another fraudulent change or whatever they call it.
Sebastian, early in Rosemaria's reply, I saw you smiling. I don't know if that was a supportive grin or a ironic grin, but perhaps you can tell us.
Maybe you can remind me exactly what was it that she said that made me smile. I was probably remembering something that happened to me, but I can't tell you exactly who it was.
Well, in that case, I'll give you time to remember. I asked you, David, this second section of today's conference is called about storytelling. And here you are with your new job dealing with Russia and the world of fake news and fake facts and its relations to Trump's America with its world of fake news and fake facts. Have you come to any conclusion about how you're going to teach your course?
Yes, so I came here in May. I'm very fortunate to be a colleague of Martin's here in the Havel program in the Green School. After 24 years in Washington, it was a good time to get out of Washington, I thought, in part for the reasons you're alluding to, Richard. I recently finished a book, my first book, called Back to Containment in Putin's Regime. Excuse me. I started the book by going back to Putin's rise to power in 1999 with 4 very mysterious bombings that killed 300 people that also turned the political situation upside down in Russia and enabled Putin to rise as president. After that, he sent Russian military and security services into Chechnya in a brutal, bloody campaign, an indiscriminate use of force that killed as many Chechens as possible. And the current Putin line is to forget all of that. It was used to show that Putin was a strong man, a decisive figure, who would do whatever was deemed necessary to put down a supposed Chechen rebellion and to deal with Chechen terrorists who, in fact, never claimed responsibility for those bombings. There was good reason to believe that, in fact, the FSB or parts of it were behind those bombings. I cite this because there is a total whitewashing of history taking place in Russia these days. I was thinking of what Rosemaria was saying about her permission to leave the country. Regimes these days, the Cuban regime, the Putin regime, like to be able to point to limited examples to say that they are, people can leave. Echo Moskvy is a radio station in Moscow that is very critical of the Putin regime. So that Putin can point to that radio station and say, you have freedom of the press. Ksenia Sobchak, who was very close to the Putin family, Putin worked for her father in St. Petersburg. She's now been permitted to run for president. But a person who wants to run for president and challenge Putin, Alexei Navalny, is not allowed. He is not given that right to run. So I really appreciate the distinction you have drawn between permission granted by the regime versus rights that are endowed to all of us, universal rights that are given to all of us as human beings. I think that's a critical distinction. And these regimes want to be able to point to you and say, you're in Miami today. What are you complaining about? We're not holding you back. And for Russians to be able to criticize the Putin regime. A very good friend of mine, Boris Nemtsov, was shot and killed yards from the Kremlin, February 2015. Another good friend of mine, Vladimir Kara-Murza, was poisoned twice, not just once, twice. Survived amazingly both times. This is what these kinds of regimes do to people like your father. When they have the courage, the gumption to speak out and criticize and demand rights, not permission. This is what happens to these people. So I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be part of the program with Martin and to be with such a distinguished group.
I want to present to, thank you, I want to present to the quality of bearing witness. And maybe, Sebastian, I want to read you something for you to comment on. And it comes from the end of the preface that Stefan Zweig wrote in his memoirs. And Zweig had escaped from Nazi Germany and was in Brazil when he wrote his autobiography. And he wrote, I'm aware of the unfavourable circumstances, characteristic though they are of our time, in which I am trying to shape my reminiscences. I write them in the midst of war in a foreign country, and without the least aids to my memory. None of my books, none of my notes, no friends or letters are at hand in my hotel room. Nowhere can I seek information, for the whole world the mails from country to country have been disrupted or hampered by censorship. He goes on, I have nothing more of my past with me than what I have retained in my mind. All else at this moment is unobtainable or lost. But the good art of not pining over that which is lost has been thoroughly learnt by our generation, and it's quite possible that the loss of documentation and detail may actually be an advantage for my book. For I look upon our memory not as an element which accidentally retains or forgets, but rather as a consciously organising and wisely exclusionary power. All that one forgets of one's life was long since predestined by an inner instinct to be forgotten. Only that which wills to preserve itself has the right to be preserved for others. So choose and speak to me, ye memories. Is that a reasonable point of view?
Yeah, unfortunately, he committed suicide shortly after with his wife. I can imagine how difficult it must have been for him to look at the world the way he looked back then, with Germany and Nazism growing the way it was growing. And we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the October Revolution, the Soviet Revolution. And I'm always surprised. I have been, I'm not an academic, by the way, but I have been in academia for the last 20 years. Surrounded by academics, reading academics, listening to academics. And I'm always surprised how easy it is to condemn Nazism and how difficult it is to condemn communism in the same terms. How is it perfectly normal for a professor at a university to be declared Marxist And yet, having ideas that are similar to Nazism, people known as white supremacists, is completely rejected by most people, by most decent people, and I agree that they must be rejected. My question is, why is it that we have this double standard on these two totalitarians? And we must remember that these are totalitarian societies, both of them. And communism, according to the Black Book of Communism, is responsible for about 100 million people. Deaths since that fateful October in 1917. How many more millions the Nazis would have killed if they were not engaged in a total war remains to be seen. But it's important to understand the way you deal with memory. And that's precisely the topic that I wanted to discuss today, because by coincidence, when Ambassador Paluz invited me to be part of the panel, I was reading this book by distinguished Cuban scholar Rafael Rojas, who deals with the memory, and with the memory fabricated by the Cuban state. And I'm going to quote him, because he's the expert. No one I've ever seen anybody say what he says, so with such clarity. He argues that the Castro regime confiscated the memory of the Cuban people when they took over in 1959, and developed, and I'm quoting, a hegemonic narrative of the past, a Manichaean and intransigent version of nationalism, developing a false identity between state and nation. And this is very important. The state, in this case, was Fidel Castro. He was the revolution. So from there, l'état se moda. Fidel was the state. And then he became the nation. And the Cuba that we have today is the result of that fabrication. And it's very difficult to understand Cuba if you don't understand this fabrication, personally created by Fidel Castro. And I'm going further. Rojas claims that his, Fidel Castro's role in this fabrication was so fundamental that his personal recollections of history became the official history of Cuba. What Fidel said, not what happened, what Fidel said, to the point that Rojas called this a historical ideology. So we're dealing with a state, a whole powerful state, totalitarian state that has been entrenched in power for 58 years, that has a pervasive nation that reaches every aspect of Cuban society, that has managed to combine in this historical ideology the idea of state and nationhood, to the point that you can ask any recent arrived Cubans, and there are many, when you criticize the Cuban government, they become defensive because they assume that you're criticizing the nation. They stop criticizing my country and say, I'm part of the country, I was born. Cuba is not more yours than it is mine. I'm not criticizing the country, I'm criticizing the government. It's equivalent that someone criticizing any government in the United States will criticize the United States. Well, Castro has managed to indoctrinate 3 generations of Cubans into believing this. And there are many Cubans here in the United States who are living in a free country, but they are not free because they still believe this. So in their minds, they are captives of this historical ideology.
Well, George Orwell said, he who controls the past controls the future. I hesitate to disagree with David Bush's point that history is written by the victors. The victors do write their history, but not exclusively. Herodotus was from a much looked down upon area of the Greek Empire. Thucydides was a failed general who was sacked, who lived in exile. Clarendon, Charles II's time, wrote his history of England while a fugitive, and there are other exceptions. And even say during and after the Spanish Civil War, first Hugh Thomas, then Preston, more recently Anthony Beever, were writing histories of the Spanish Civil War, which the Spanish were taking as the truth. So I was wondering what you think now in terms of whether it's personal stories or the works of historians, whether in Cuba, if you like, the truth of the past is being accepted, that people know what the past was. Was there still a real conflict between the various stories?
Yes. And I apologize because I have to unfortunately head home, so my apologies to my fellow panelists. To you, just very quickly, your point, Sebastian, about Nazism and communism, I think, is also a critical point. And I say this as a Jewish American whose father fought against the Nazis in World War II, but whose family that was left in Latvia was killed by the Soviet communists. They're both evil, and they remain evil. And despite the efforts of the current Putin regime to whitewash history, you can't change that reality, those facts. And you had asked me earlier, Richard, about fake news. It is a phenomenon not limited to the Russian regime. It is a problem, as you suggested, here in this country, where we are seeing the muddying of fact and reality and truth when people don't like things that are pointed out and brought to light. And I think it's something incumbent upon all of us, whether we're Americans, Cubans, Czechs, or anyone else, to insist that our political leaders not engage in the kind of rhetoric and effort to cloud what is in fact the real story. It's, I think, the attacks on journalists and on media we're seeing from the President of the United States are one of the most dangerous developments. I actually have confidence that American journalists are big boys and girls. They have big companies usually backing them up. I have some faith and hope and confidence that they will be okay. But it's the messages sent to others around the world and the ammunition that is literally and figuratively being given to other leaders in Cuba or China or Turkey or Russia or Egypt, Philippines, you name it. When the President of the United States says those things, it makes me cringe. And I hope that we all push back on this kind of thing. I am terribly sorry, but thank you for letting me be part of this. Say what was you wanted to...
Talking about fake news and thinking about the human being, they certainly might not have invented fake news, but they are experts at it. And Rosa Maria was talking about the founded the fake transition, or the fake reforms that the Cuban regime has been engaging for the last 10 years. It's a very well-oiled machine, and it works pretty efficiently because he was able to confuse the Economist, the magazine, one of the most respected magazines, certainly one of my favorite, into believing that capitalism had returned to Cuba. There's a big editorial in the Economist saying that, and to convince the European Union to change the composition, to backtrack essentially, abandoning fundamental values of the European Union foreign policy, just to have a conversation with the Cuban regime. And he convinced President Obama that it was a good idea to restore diplomatic relations and lift at least half of the sanctions. That's successful. It was.
Martin Pullis was mentioning Madeleine Albright's coming book on fascism, And she makes the point where if you start questioning what is true news, as Trump has done, you are giving a present to totalitarian governments to do the same thing. And it becomes much more difficult to tell the truth about history in such countries.
Can I just study myself in a 7 back to this discussion?
Well, I was thinking that you want to finish at 5, and that's we should.
We have still a couple of minutes.
I don't know whether any of the 3 of you want to add anything before we throw it open to the floor.
Just I wanted to say that, we were also already thinking also yesterday evening, that simply maybe we shouldn't be called post-Bell, we should be called in-Bell. Because in fact, whole globe, in fact, is still in fight for democracy and human rights, even here in the United States, and it's really surprising me that, we have to fight with these facts, and I think that our tool, I call it tool, let's say, is that shows you, if you see 20, 30 witnesses, they are telling pretty the same story. Then you cannot say simply, you cannot, it will be much more difficult for those people like, sorry, President of the United States simply, manipulates with the facts. So manipulating with the facts will be much more difficult then. And this is, I think, the main idea why we were also, proposing this project and implementing here. So that's, I think, maybe the way how we should fight with this attempts of.
Well, Leonard was talking about the congregation of testimonies having like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
Martin.
Can I just step into this discussion myself?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Can I look back? Okay. Sorry. Originally, I thought I wanted to react to your question about the Czech schedule together with Cubans. And I think that the argument is very clear. If I see the situation from international perspective, I would almost provocatively say that one of the biggest enemies of Cuba is indifference. Cuba is not, I would say, bad enough to shock the conscience of mankind. And yet there is certain phenomenon, and I will be quoting from Václav Havel. He was deep struck by when he was observing our version of totalitarianism or the metamorphosis of totalitarianism in 1986. It was not oblivion, it was not struggle of memory against forgetfulness, but it was nihilization. It was the strange capacity of totalitarian regime to destroy human stories, to destroy time in which things are happening. And just listen to what Havel said, and I think that it's much better than if I am trying to describe it. It is not true that Czechoslovakia is free of warfare and murder. The war and killing assume a different form. They have been shifted from the daylight of observable public events to the twilight of unobservable inner destruction. It would seem that the absolute classical death, of which one reads in stories, and which for all terrors involves it still mysteriously able to impart meaning to human life, has been replaced here by another kind of death. The soul, secretive, bloodless, never quite absolute, yet horrifyingly ever-present death of non-action, non-story, non-life, and non-time. The collectively deadening, or more precisely anesthetizing, process of social and historical nihilization. This nihilization annuls death as such, and thus annuls life as such. The life of an individual becomes the dual and uniform functioning of a component in a large machine. And his death is merely something that puts him out of commission. So I think that the life in total society, that's exactly what it offers to human beings, just to get rid, to be deprived of their stories. So if there is someone who can help these stories coming back to life,
but in that case, can I ask Ms. Maria, as your most obviously and courageously the most activist of us all here. What would you like the people listening to the conference today to take away from it?
Well, I will start by challenging one word that my friend Sebastian was mentioning once and again, and is they convince American administration, they convince media, they convince European Union. I think that in this point of the history, the facts are well known. I mean, I didn't talk with a single person in the European Parliament that were not aware that Cuba was not changing, that the Castro's regime was showing any kind of transformation towards democracy. Everybody there knew that that was not true. Everybody in Washington knew that Cuba was not going through a transition process to democracy. They just choose to buy that story, but because in order to engage with the new approach, let's say, you need a justification, and that justification was provided by the regime in the shape of the fraudulent change, in the shape of the Rolling Stone singing in Havana. So that if I could ask something for the international community that is here also to recall and to exercise is to look directly to the people, to look directly to the citizens inside the island, and actually to the citizens, to the Cuban nation that lives inside and out of the island, and to look for the solutions on them and not on the inventions of one external country or another external government, or in the mockeries that the Cuban regime provide for them to buy in a very reactionary approach, in a very reactionary way to see life and change, and almost in a colonialist way, in which the governments prefer to deal with power than to look to the oppressed. And that's why we are fighting inside the island and outside the island also, asking for the support to the right to decide of the Cuban people. In a conditions in which totalitarianism is not broken, but they are collapsing anyway, and it does not mean that we are going to a democracy because Raúl Castro is going to die, or because Venezuela collapsed and we have no more money. There are a lot of others, travelers talking about Russia or China or Vietnam or even a narco-corporative state that we could go to if we don't start very soon a real transition process. But that's not going to start by the will of those that are right now in power and just want to preserve power, and it's not going to start just by the intervention of an external country. It's going to start when the Cuban people could have a voice on that process. And the way to have a voice, well, was invented by democracy like decades ago, is the elections. That's why we are asking for a plebiscite, and that's why we are hoping that those external countries, those external democracies, that decent international community to support not what the dictators are claiming, but what the Cuban people is needing. And that's simply, it's just to have a voice, to have the right to decide, and that decision to be effective, as it should be also in Venezuela, and as it could be actually the tool that detonates a transition process that then is going to have to deal with past, and is going to have to deal with the transitional justice, and is going to have to deal with reconciliation. First step, support the right to decide of the Cuban people, and you can do that, pushing your governments and your representatives to support that right on the hands of the Cuban citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to ask a brief, concise question? Yes. You'll need to throw your voice.
Well, first of all, again, I think this was a very interesting panel. This was a very interesting panel. Can you hear?
I can hear you.
And I want to address what Sebastián brought up about totalitarianism being a historical ideology. And something that dawned on me in the first panel, which is totalitarianism is always remembering. It's remembering facts that aren't facts, that are a distortion of truth. And I want to tie this in with the following. This panel was very well conceived because both Rosa Maria and Sebastián are examples of bearing witness to the crimes of the Castro regime. His father, Sebastián Arcos, was also murdered by that regime. He was one of the founders of the human rights movements in Cuba. His uncle, Gustavo, was the president of the Cuban Committee for Human Rights. His other uncle, Luis, died fighting the Batista dictatorship. And I think that it's incredible when you go to Cuban history, as prepared by the Castro regimes, those names have been wiped out. They don't appear because the regime is constantly remembering what Fidel chooses to remember, or what he chose to remember to build his ideology. So I think that the question lies not in remembering Cuba. A lot of people remember facts that aren't real. It's the appreciation of the experience of memory. You know, we've had generations of Cubans indoctrinated to remember what didn't exist and to be alienated from the reality of the experience the nation lived. Fortunately, there's a diaspora where that memory has continued to thrive and to exist. And that will be an important component of any process of reconciliation. And I guess my question to Sebastián, I'm sorry I'm extending myself, is what do you think the role of the Cuban exile community, of the Cuban exile institutions, will be in that process of reconciliation that eventually must come to Cuba?
Fundamental. Not only because of the memory component that you pointed, which I personally experienced. When I left Cuba in 1992, I knew only the part of the history that I had been taught by the regime in school. And then I came here and learned the other half of the history. Let me give you a specific example. And again, it matches with memory, and it matches with the way the regime has falsified the memory. But not only that, and I want to go beyond into how the regime defines the opponent. Because that's also a fundamental part of that distortion of history. And one of the biggest challenges in achieving reconciliation in Cuba is the way the regime defines the opponent. Every nation at war dehumanizes the enemy. It's part of propaganda. That is called propaganda for a reason, right? But in this historic ideology that the Cuban government has constructed, the opponents are not only inhuman, and they use the terms counter-revolutionary, that was the first term that they used. And they move on and they call them mercenaries. And that's going to bring me back to the example that I want to use, which is the Brigade 25-6. Or they call them bandits, the people who were in the mountains with the guerrilla war, very similar to the one Castro had just finished in Sierra Maestra. But Castro was the hero, the others were bandits. And eventually leading into traitors to the homeland. So the opponents are not just people who have a different perception of politics. They are anti-Cubans. It's very difficult to engage in a conversation with anti-Cubans when you claim to represent the nation of Cuba. So that dilemma was created by the regime, and I think it's intentional, because those who are at the top know exactly what they're doing, but people who are at the bottom, many don't know the difference between a mercenary or a realista of Brigade 2506. The history that I was taught was that these people were mercenaries to the point, and this is pure memory. As a child, I grew up believing that the camouflage uniform, any camouflage uniform used by any military in the world, was the dress of the mercenaries. Because the people who were capturing the pigs were wearing camouflage fatigues, and they were, in my mind, the mercenaries. Well, I get to Miami and I get to meet the mercenaries, and I find a lot of decent people that I would have loved to have known years before, to the point that they acknowledge that their enemy on the other side, the milicianos who fought against the enemy in Europe, they were human beings and they have flaws and they have virtues, and many of them fought gallantly and many of them fought valiantly. So I get from the mercenaries here in Miami the perception of the enemy or the opponent that the regime was not willing to give us.
But it makes it sound as if you're saying the word reconciliation is inappropriate and impractical.
It's not. I'm not saying that it's inappropriate. I'm saying that, in my opinion, in order to achieve reconciliation, we had some of that conversation yesterday, we need to have an agreement that history is not one-sided. It's not my history is the only one history. Once we come down from that pedestal and we agree that we have different versions of the same event, but the event actually happened, and especially that contenders in that conflict were both sides were humans and had valid aspirations, that had human emotions and had reasons to do what they were doing, then we can move to reconciliation. But it's impossible to achieve reconciliation when the state is standing on that pedestal saying, my history is the only one, and you are not my opponent, you are anti-Cuban. They're not even giving you the opportunity to be an opponent. You could be an alien invading from a different galaxy. You're anti-Cuban, anti-nation. Imagine how difficult it is to surpass that barrier. So they need to come down from the pedestal. And that hasn't happened. And the opposition in Cuba and abroad has been trying to get the Cuban regime to acknowledge that they need to come down from this pedestal. The Cuban Committee for Human Rights, where I was part of, proposed the idea of a national dialogue back in 1991. And here we are. Hasn't happened. Because they simply are not willing to acknowledge that they have flaws, that they have made mistakes, that the opponent is actually an opponent and not a non-national or an anti-national entity.
Anybody else with a question? In that case, can I? Oh, I'm sorry.
So sorry.
Yes, have you got the mic?
No, I just have one question. Thanks. Hello? How about now? Yeah. I'm curious to get each one of your take on this, if possible. We've talked a lot about the impact that these totalitarian states have on their own citizenry, but we're living in an interesting time. I never thought I would drive down the streets of Washington, D.C. and see a billboard for Russia Today. And Russia Today has had quite an impact, at least in terms of getting people to listen to it, to follow it here in the United States. Are these state-controlled presses from totalitarian societies that are now targeting democracies having any impact? And if so, what is that impact? What is the benefit to that? Is Russia Today successful at all reaching Americans? Are they trying to reach Russians who have defected the diaspora? And is Grandma at all successful at reaching Cubans here in Miami? What are they trying to achieve? And this question kind of came out of left field, but if you guys have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Which of the panelists influencing it?
I'm going to start.
David, yes.
I'm going to start because I think my main concern about the days that we're living today is the tendency to go to the extremes, the tendency to obstruct the civilized conversation and to go to the screen. And I see this coming more from the left than from the right. Maybe I'm biased. I grew up in a communist society where there was no conversation at that level, and when we came out of closet as dissidents in Cuba, we were confronted by the screen, what Cubans know as acto de república. And that's the way the government has to respond to this state. So, one of the reasons this society has been so successful economically, culturally, you name it, is because it's an open society. And an open society implies that conversation, maintaining the dialogue. There are no taboo topics. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. And what I'm seeing here in the United States, and I'm shocked, is that there are some universities, Stanford is one of them, where this conversation is not being allowed, particularly by the left. They just don't want to allow a conversation. They want to impose a perspective, and that's totalitarian. That is exactly what actos de repudio in Cuba mean. Whenever I see that in Stanford, I go back to the mobs in front of my house. That's what they are. They are totalitarian mobs. We cannot confuse totalitarian mobs with people who are fighting white supremacy. Because now they are hiding behind that. But what they want to do really is to impose their perspective. So we have to be very much aware of this.
I see Martin Kovac. All I would do in conclusion is, I was mentioning to... I'm sorry, you go forward.
No, I mean, I just totally agree with Sebastian, and it's actually shocking to be here coming from a totalitarian state where that is the rule, and to face that we are living in a world ruled by opinions and not by respect to the truth. And I'm not talking about that fundamental truth that nobody can claim to have. I'm talking about the corroborative facts, the data, the evidence. That all that sense have been diminished, and opinions have risen in the place of that truth, of that facts, of that data. And the answer to your question is yes, of course that Russia, Castro's, Chavez, China, they want to intoxicate the rest of the world. They need the rest of the world. They also live in the global community. They need to engage with the American administration. They need to buy oil. They need to sell oil. They need to buy dollars. Of course that they need to intoxicate the rest of the society. The point here is why these open societies are so fragile and so susceptible to that kind of intoxication. Why you are seeing an academy that is each time more biased and more disrespectful for that truth or for that fact or for that data, and it's going more and more away from the real debate, the real confrontation of the opinions. I think the same thing. I think that the left is, or a part of the left is bringing some intolerance to the academy environments, but I don't think that that's happening spontaneously. I think that there is a design behind those scenarios, behind that reality that we are facing, and that design, of course, is connected with this other source of evil in the world.
What I wanted to say was Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who was a speechwriter to JFK, wrote a book sometime in the late 1950s called The Vital Center. And the argument of that book was there is a range of discourse between the left and the right, which composes, he was talking about the United States, he could have meant it worldwide, that composes the central area of proper, decent discussion. And the people who are within that centre must oppose the extreme left and the extreme right, both of whom have fascist tendencies.
Yeah.
And it's not a kind of comfortable liberalism, it's something which must be followed through with an intensity and a commitment to make sure the centre holds. And that is the way forward for applications in any country where one wants the best to prevail.
Yes, but true, but we are witnessing new moral imperatives that are not even moral, taking the place of the real debate, taking the place of respect for the real facts and the real events that are taking place each day. So it's not, even when I think that we can see that tendency from the left, as we can see it from the white supremacists also, what we are talking about here is not merely ideological. What we are talking about here is almost the scientific truth. It's almost if we are going to be together to try to find that truth, or if we are going to surround in front of the design of others that we cannot even purely identify right now.
Without further questions, I think that's a very strong end to our discussion. So I could ask you all to thank our three panelists.
And this is actually the end of our program here. Once more, I would like to thank all the participants, but also all the organizers who have been also responsible for that. There is still a good announcement to be made. Now we are all invited for a small reception in adjacent room here, so we can follow up this conversation in informal settings. I think it's very clear that now we have a job to do, because the collective message being formulated here, I think, is worthwhile to be sent out, and I think it's a moral shame that sometimes these voices don't fall into the listening ears. So let's do anything possible, us Czechs, Americans, others, to really spread the voices of Cubans, Venezuelans, and all others. That's great commitment, and let's keep working on it. In bello, post bello, whatever it is. Thank you very much.